Okay, so hello and welcome again to part 3 of our first lecture in FS 101. As I mentioned in the last part, today we'll be discussing the definition of food security and the current situation of food and nutrition in the Philippines. And hopefully, this would steer us to do our jobs and make us realize as well gaano kabigat ba yung nakatuon sa atin na responsibilidad bilang mga future food scientists and technologists. So without further ado, let's start. Right, food security is defined as a situation that exists when all people, so napaka-inclusive niya, wala po tayong hindi sinasali, basta tao ka, at all times, 24/7, 365 to account for seasonality of food, have physical, social, and economic access. So this means physical, kaya mo siyang abutin. Okay. Social, you are not shunned away or ostracized from being able to access that food. And economic, may pambili ka nung food na yon. And it has to be both sufficient, safe, and nutritious. So, dapat ma-meet niya yung caloric requirements mo. Hindi ka magkasakit whether instantaneously or chronically through its consumption. And that the specific nutritional needs of your body are met so that wala kang diseases caused by nutrition deficiency, energy deficiency. And these are met towards having an active and healthy lifestyle. At hindi lang yung dietary needs mo yung nami-meet, pati yung preferences. So food security doesn't exist if all of the food you have there is something that you would not like to eat. So ganun kahirap yung trabaho ng food technologists. You have to meet all of these. Of course, agriculturists and other people in the food supply chain also help us do that, no? So in that regard, we could identify four security dimensions for food security. First is availability. Okay? So available meaning to say meron kang pananim na harvest, meron kang raw materials na pwedeng gamitin for processing, and so on. Pag pumunta ka sa grocery, pag pumunta ka sa palengke, meron kang mabibili doon, hindi siya empty stall like what happened nung nagkaubusan tayo. So, parang pag sa fast food, ay sorry sir, unavailable po yung ganito, ganyan. Okay, so how about physical access to food? Economic and physical, as I mentioned before. So, paano kung meron ngang enough food in the Philippines? Pero halimbawa, ikaw nasa Marawi ka dahil dun sa ongoing war a few years ago, no, nung time na yon, hindi ka naman mabigyan ng food, hindi makadating yung food sa'yo. Or like nangyayari ngayon sa lockdowns, yung start ng lockdown last year na hindi makatravel yung ibang mga food trucks delivering raw harvested food. So of course, there's no physical access if it doesn't reach the destination. And economic access, as we've mentioned before, kahit nasa loob ka pa ng grocery at lahat yan ay abot kamay mo na, kung wala namang laman yung iyong pitaka, wala ka mabibili. Diba? Defeats the purpose. Okay? So, there's also what we call food utilization. Dapat nasa bahay ay may utilize mo yung pagkain mo. So, paano kung nandyan nga yung pagkain pero napanis na siya kasi hindi mo agad nagamit, or kaya dahil summer ngayon, no, natira siya ng langgam or ng ipis ng daga or whatever, no, so pest or rodent infestation, then you won't be able to utilize that. Okay, even if it's already in your hands. O kaya nabulok yung kamote mo, yung saging mo, pagbukas mo may maggots na kahit na 2 days ago mo palang binili. That's unutilized food. Okay? And lastly, we want stability. As we know, food is seasonal. So we want to be able to have a steady supply of food that meets the definition of food security year-round, day or night. So even if let's say you have food but food is only available for purchase 12 hours in a day, kung sa gabi night shift ka sa trabaho tulad nung sa akin before at kinulang yung dala mong pagkain, wala kang mabilhan, you're food insecure. Okay? So also food processing contributes a lot to stability because certain processed foods make the foods available for a longer period of time or sometimes even year round. And perhaps you've even heard about how a certain agriculturalist was able to work with mangoes to make them bloom year round, no, na namumunga na yung mga puno ng yung ibang puno ng mangga buong taon instead of just a summer season. Okay, so as you can see, talagang napakahirap nitong food security, and actually some people say that it's almost impossible to meet food security, no? Kasi hindi lang yan zero hunger, talagang it has to be perfect balance of food for active and healthy life 24/7, 365. So usually we say that food security is something we desire to have and work towards, but I don't think any single, let's say, country for that matter has already met this definition of food security, kahit yung mga pinaka-lodi ninyo na mga first world countries in the Europe or what, no? But they've probably been much closer to food security than we are here in the Philippines. Alright, so with that regard, we have the definition of food insecurity, which is somewhat yung kabaliktaran ng food security, a situation that exists when people lack secure access to sufficient amounts of safe and nutritious food for normal growth and development and an active and healthy life. So the causes, of course, are the unavailability of food, insufficient purchasing power, inappropriate distribution, or inadequate use of food at the household level. So parang dinegate lang natin yung doon sa 4 facets kanina ng security, no? So food insecurity, poor conditions of health and sanitation, and inappropriate care and feeding practices are the major causes of poor nutrition. And food insecurity may be chronic, seasonal, or transitory. So chronic, meaning over the long term, mahirap ka talaga, wala ka talagang pambili. Seasonal, you live in an area wherein biglang bumagyo, nawalan kayo ngayon ng local market produce kasi naanod lahat or nasira yung mga crops na dapat i-harvest. Or transitory, no? Meaning to say, yun nga, merong local situation, pwedeng yung lockdown, pwedeng caught up ka sa isang gera or a very short period wherein let's say lumikas kayo, okay, tapos pagdating dun sa evacuation center may logistical problems para hindi nyo ma-meet yung definition ng food security like you would have wanted. Alright, so if we take time to digest all these, we'll realize just how big interventions of food scientists and technologists can be to address the issue of availability, the issue of making food more affordable para ma-purchase mo na siya. So minsan pinagtatawanan niyo yung mga parang murang pagkain na nabibili ninyo na wala namang halos nutritional value, pero if that's what the poor people can buy, no, then it's better than going hungry for a day. But of course, food insecure ka pa rin kung kulang sa sustansya. But at least that's nearer to food security than having nothing to eat. There's also a big part of food scientists and distribution and logistics, as I mentioned before in my former line of work. Yung simpleng pag-monitor ng temperature sa truck is a part of a food technologist's work, no? And of course, pagdating naman sa household level, we can either create the foods para mas ma-utilize siya bago mapanis, or we could do information drives about whether something is still fit to eat, or how you could make sure na kapag nag-grocery ka ay hindi mo maiiwan yung isang pagkain na 1 year na hindi mo pa nagamit, no? Parang ganun, tapos napanis na lang. Alright, so yan, napaka-lungkot actually ng food insecurity situation in the Philippines, as we'll see in a while. So, food for life. So just to see here, here is a graph of the number of deaths resulting from pellagra in the United States after the vitamin and mineral fortification of bread flour. No, so this disease is caused by niacin and tryptophan deficiency and causes gastrointestinal and mental disorders, which is fatal if untreated. Kaya makita mo dito, deaths caused by that specific disease, no? So it was most commonly associated in the US with a diet based on corn or sorghum, which are poor sources of both tryptophan and niacin, mga essential amino acids ito that our body cannot produce. And because those types of people did not eat a lot of meat or vegetables to improve their protein intake profile. So as you can see, the intervention, which we could consider as something of a food science intervention, was something as simple as um, fortifying the bread flour with vitamins and minerals. And as you can see, from over 3,000 deaths in 1938, in just a matter of 10 years, that's become less than 1,000 until it became just a few hundred deaths and close to zero by 1954. So in the Philippines, we also have some kind of similar stories as to, for example, yung salt iodization law na lahat ng ng salt na dapat binibili for food consumption ay may halo ng iodine, and it has done well in combating iodine deficiency. No, we also fortify other stuff like our flour, our oil is also fortified. So yeah, isang example lang ito ng kung anong kayang gawin ng food science and technology interventions. In this case, it's not even just food security, it's public health. No? You've reduced drastically the number of deaths to maybe by 99% in a span of a bit over 15 years. And that is a big achievement. No? So, now let's look at yung situation ng food and nutrition in the country. Okay, so disclaimer, this report was done in 2017, so it covered the period of around mostly the Pinoy term and did not, of course, include yung pandemic natin. But nonetheless, these are still figures we could look to. So, from 2010 to around 2016 or 2017, the average annual GDP growth rate was 6.2. This is a positive thing, medyo mataas po ito. And it technically means that we should have had improvements in our nutrition and food security outcomes. Unfortunately, the Philippines did not beat the MDG. Yung before magkaroon ng Sustainable Development Goals, we had the Millennium Development Goals, and that was to have hunger by 2015. So that was not met, and that's a sad outcome. So there was actually a 3.2% increase in stunting or yung pagkabansot or masyado kang maliit for your age in 0 to 5-year-old children from the period of 2013 to 2015, and that's also sad. Bahagi nito ay yung of course yung quality and amount of food na kinakain ng mga bata, and syempre when we have poverty, mas mahirap mapakain yung mga kabataan natin ng masustansya at sapat na pagkain. 33.4%, equivalent to around 3.7 million children aged 0 to 5 are stunted in total, no? So which means yung sa total na bilang ng mga short for height ay essentially 1 in 3. Okay? And if we compute this, if we put a monetary value to this cost of malnutrition, it would amount to 328 billion. Paano po kinompute ito? Since that affects their mental and physical health, you would have to spend on additional educational costs, and you would have reduced human capital formation. So in terms of dahil sa malnutrition that happened from the ages 0 to 5, it could permanently affect their life outcomes and their capability to work in certain capacities. And of course, there's also excess mortality, which means some of them might not actually make it, or because of maybe their malnutrition in their younger years, by the time sila na yung magkaanak, ay maaari ring mag-increase yung mortality rate sa kanilang mga magiging anak. So, in terms of prutas at gulay, the FAO recommendation is that you have a per capita consumption of 146 to 182 kilograms per year. So, ang isang tao ay dapat kumain ng sa humigit kumulang halos kalahating kilong worth of fruit and vegetables in a day. Unfortunately, how does the Philippine fare compared to that? We have a per capita consumption of vegetables. It's just 22 kilograms per year. If you compute that on a per day basis, that's a very low number. That's less than 100 grams of vegetables. Okay? And that is severely affecting yung nutrition outcomes natin. So the situationer identified a couple of problems. So expensive rice, unresponsive food system, contributing to expensive food. Of course, climate and other shocks that magnifies risks and vulnerabilities. Gap in planning wherein the plans are good on paper but suck when executed. And governance and service delivery gaps wherein there's a lack of training of personnel and the personnel turnover is high, meaning umaalis yung mga taong nandun sa pwesto na dapat gawin yung frontline services. So we'll discuss each of this in turn, no? And then circle back to our facts and figures. Okay, so policy incoherence. In case you didn't know, yung bigas ng Pilipinas ay mas mahal kaysa pag pumunta ka sa ibang bansa. Okay? And since the poorest 20% of our country spends 1/3 of their food, 1/3 of their total budget for food, malaki yung impact ng mahal na pagkain, lalo na sa mga may hirap. Okay? Ang cause po nito ay dahil gusto ng Philippines na maging 100% self-sufficient in rice production, no? Restrictive trade policies in rice motivated by this self-sufficiency has led to domestic rice prices far exceeding world prices and up to twice the level paid by ASEAN consumers. Okay? So actually yung sinasabi ng government na ay ginagawa ng government na intervention na nagpapapasok ng foreign rice para mapababa yung presyo ng bigas, in a way may sense ito for the greater population. However, this does seem to hurt our local rice farmers who can no longer sell their produce at competitive prices or livable wage prices. Pero actually yung solution naman dyan is probably dalawa yan, no? Either i-improve mo yung capability ng Pilipinas para ma-match yung presyong kayang i-offer ng mga ASEAN countries, okay, to an extent, or we would just have to focus on other agricultural commodities na kaya natin maging competitive both in the local and international scene. Kasi kung pipilitin mo na i-ban yung rice na available at 30 pesos per kilo na galing sa ibang bansa para lang mabuhay yung ating mga farmers who sell at 50 pesos, yung mga mahihirap who would have to bear the burden of paying 20 kilograms per kilo of local rice would be a much larger disadvantage. So it's really a balancing act and it's not easy. It's hard to be in the shoes of government and that's sad. Okay? So, and the rice is a very important issue kasi lahat tayo kumakain ito in great quantities, no? So, tanggapin man natin o hindi, yung presyo ng bigas ay isang napakalaking factor sa poverty sa Pilipinas. Okay? So, said here, a study by Konishi, Vanderbeek, and Chua actually mentions it as the price being stubbornly high. Okay? And not just that, because when you increase the price of rice, you increase the chance of children being malnourished because they have to spend more for rice and less for other foods, no? And that's a sad reality. Okay, what about the unresponsive food system? Okay, so it is a combination of trade distortions, inefficient logistics, post-harvest losses, and uncompetitive marketing practices. Suffice to say, this combination, ang bottom line po nito is higher prices and lower farmer income. So we want to find the solution that minimizes these inefficiencies to bring down the price and work towards a certain just framework that gives farmers a decent income, a dignified level of income so that they're not poor. No, sometimes nga nakakalungkot na ikaw yung farmer, ikaw pa yung kung ano yung kakainin mo na lang sana para sa harvest mo, yun pa yung ibebenta mo para lumaki ng konti yung iuwi mong pera. Sometimes palugi ka pa, no? Nagtanim ka, nagtoil ka, tapos binagyo ka, in the end may utang ka pa. Kasi inutang mo lang yung pambili mo ng seeds mo for that cropping season. And we know for a fact that food prices are more volatile than other commodities. We've seen yung mga memes ng repolyo na magkano 400 per kilo. Isang pirasong repolyo parang minimum wage mo na, ganon. So, and if you go to the market, you'd realize that fruits and vegetables are expensive. Okay? Prohibitively so. And this means that there's less diet diversity for the poor. Kung ano lang yung mga prutas, gulay at karne, isda or whatever na ma-afford nila, yun lang yung kakainin nila. And sometimes you can see na yung instant noodles inuulam na lang sa kanin. Kasi yun lang talaga yung budget nila. Hindi ka man lang makabili ng kaprasong gulay na pang dagdag sustansya dun sa ano mo. Those are just mostly carbohydrates, certain forms of protein, and that's it. That's sad, no? Really depressing. So there have been even episodes of rapid food price inflations, and this reverses the nutritional improvements in recent years. No, poor household face a very great challenge in boosting the diet diversity compared to high-income household, and one of the biggest reasons is simply because the fruit and vegetable retail prices have increased fastest compared to 2012. Although in recent years, humahabol din yung baboy natin at manok na sobrang ginto na yung baboy. Again, as I mentioned before, as a student, I'd buy a kilo of pork for 130, and right now, maswerte ka na sa 300 pesos lang, no? And ano pa yun, yung may buto-buto pa siguro yun. So, yun, medyo malungkot talaga. Okay, climates and other shocks, this should come as no surprise that we've had a lot of displacements due to fire conflicts, flooding, and earthquakes. And if you add the pandemic shock, that would probably contribute significantly to malnutrition, no, of especially of children right now with the high rate of unemployment. So, by 2050, mas malaki pa dapat yung ine-expect nilang impact nito sa mga may hirap, lalo na kung yung climate change ay hindi natin magawa ng sapat na interventions, and would be hit with more natural disasters which are actually in a sense man-made na dahil sa climate change, no? And even right now with the vulnerable conditions in evacuation centers, talagang kawawa yung mga marginalized na walang ibang mapuntahan. Okay? And again, with the pandemic, hindi pa natin sure kung gaano kalala yung magiging effect nito, especially sa children. Even if gumaling sila, may permanent damage pa sa katawan. Halimbawa, yung pagkakaroon nila ng COVID. I don't know. Sana wala. In terms of planning, there's a gap. There's what you call the Philippine Plan of Action for Nutrition, PPAN. You can download this. It's a public document like COA guidelines, no, and guides the planning at the national and local levels. However, even if it's good on paper, it's made by competent nutritionists and other healthcare professionals. Pagdating natin sa translation and integration nito sa Philippine Development Plan, which is a separate plan by the Philippine government, the sector plans for agriculture, infrastructure, and environment, national resources, and even the local nutrition action plans and comprehensive development plans, parang nakakaligtaan or hindi siya na-integrate, hindi parang at the barangay level, lalo na municipal level. We don't know to what extent na susunod yung mga planong ito, no? At kung hindi man sila masunod, syempre, a plan is only as good as its execution. You cannot save the world with a very good plan if that plan doesn't come into fruition. So, And also, it misses out in local programming and budgeting. And if you don't have any budget, how will you carry out that plan? So parang pagdating sa mga LGU, kahit may pipan ka, nakakaligtaan ng mga LGU or hindi na rin siguro alam ng iba kung paano pa natin ipa-prioritize yan. Ang dami-daming problema ng Pilipinas, isasama mo pa yung pipan mo. Pero I can't blame the LGUs if they don't have enough resources. No? Pero sana man lang magawa ng intervention na like you have municipal health officers and nutritionists, you have barangay nutrition scholars, pero syempre kulang na kulang yun, no? Kasi ang laki ng problema at konti lang yung workers. Governance and service delivery gap. So again, I mentioned BNS or Barangay Nutrition Scholars. Food security and nutrition are multidimensional phenomena caused by a complex set of interrelated factors. As a consequence, food science and nutrition governance structures are confronted with multiple challenges as the various agencies involved strive to achieve meaningful coordination. Unfortunately, this governance structure is unable to transcend the seemingly inevitable overlap, confusion, and fragmentation of investments and actions across the various actors, both national and local, within the nutrition and health delivery system. So most frontline workers, especially the barangay nutrition scholars, are ill-equipped to handle the caseloads of households with malnourished children within their communities. These workers, mostly bereft of tenure, sometimes in difficult environments, and the training outcomes cannot be sustained owing to the frequent turnover of workers. So parang overworked, underpaid, ill-equipped, and sobrang bigat ng trabaho. So magre-resign ka na lang, no? Imbis na, kasi ang laki ng problema, lalo na siguro sa rural communities or sa urban poor areas with high population densities. So even the government's agricultural extension cannot respond to certain technical and organizational needs of small farmers and fishers, no? So in short, dito we are being beaten back by our poor status as a developing country. We don't have enough budget for these things, or maybe we're prioritizing other things with our budget that shouldn't be prioritized, no? But nonetheless, it's a very real problem, and the interventions are not easy.